So we've talked a lot about transparency and making that data visible and transparent. And you touched on this, but I'd like to drill into it more. Like connecting that to the business goal or the business plan. Like what's our revenue plan? What margins do we need? Cash are we trying to build? You know
Mhm.
what what hiring are we wanting to do?
So, as you said, it's having a cadence, which we've talked about before. It's um, it's not just one thing. It has to be consistently going over where you're currently at, where you want to be, and the roadblocks or the things that are in your way to getting there. For example, we had 6 people come out of a client, well, that we thought was going to be extended through February. So it was important that we acknowledge that to our people so that they knew that the plan had changed, and then we could figure out where those people were going to go. Now we are not as formal with our cadence as we ought to be, and we're working on that. In my mind, it should be a weekly, like a sales report, and that's what we're putting together now, a weekly projection where you go through what was projected and you look at whether or not it got closed, who got extended, and so on. But that information is what they need to have in order for them to see whether or not they're going to then hit the revenue target and the cash target and the expenses and their gross margin and so forth. But that's the information they should be looking at weekly.
And is that a function of size too, Angela? Like when you're really small and you first start out, you can see everything, right, from where you're sitting. So there's less about, you kind of have everything in your head. And then as you get bigger, there's more things to keep track of, and you have to have a system, and that's when you start putting those cadences in place, right? And then as you scale even larger, you start scaling the decision making capability and giving people, pieces of books of business within your business so that you can
Yeah, and I
scale. And
for me, I'm used to having a cadence, so being small isn't really the reason. Like for me, I can't, as a leader in the company, in order for me to feel confident when I talk about where we're at, I need the cadence because I need to know that when I talk about a sale, that I know where it's at in the
yeah.
process, or I know, because otherwise I feel like I'm talking off the cuff. Um, so, uh, that's probably because of where I've come from, but um, I think in general, you are correct that probably the business owner feels like he has the pulse of the company. And so the cadence isn't as important. But I would say that the cadence is probably as, if not more important, the smaller you are, because that's when it's really important to get it in place so that when you grow, you're not worrying about that. It's already there and you can just focus on the growth. I noticed at Pillar, when we all were there, I always felt like we were trying to do catch up, um, because we were growing so fast that we didn't have cadences in place that we needed or function in place that we needed. That we were always, you always felt like you were swimming and you couldn't get there.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to get these things in place ahead of time, and then you don't have to worry about that. That's already taken care of.
I
So.
think that's an excellent call out because we did frequently, we would realize we needed something because we needed it to function. And so now it's kind of like you said, you're always behind in the capability you need. Instead of
Mhm.
looking forward and saying, here's where we're trying to go, here's our growth plan. What do we need to put in place in order to be able to successfully move in that direction and have things in place when we are growing that we can, have what we need. I mean, even things like the data visibility is one of those things that we, didn't have at Pillar, right? When they started breaking the business into smaller chunks, we didn't have the ability to look at the part of the data you're responsible for. And it became an
Right.
issue until we changed what we were doing so that we could have that capability.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, if you have systems that are all different, and they need to get all into one, and maybe work on that. But yes, I think it is important to get your cadences in your system solidified and get that in place prior to growth. Now, I know that can't always be, but
Right.
that would be the best scenario.
Well, and you want it to become a habit, like when there's not a crisis. When there's not,
Exactly.
and a crisis is really just we've got the issue, and there's a short period of time to resolve it, right? So it's a crunch of time, a lot of times. And if we have a regular cadence where we're worrying about these things, we've got the right people looking at them. Maybe instead of looking at them weekly or monthly, we need to be looking at them daily. But we already know how to do it, who's doing it, what's happening. And if we need to meet, 3 times a week for a few weeks while there's an issue, then that's great. But we don't have to start inventing new
Right.
processes, new systems. You don't have to go try to dig up all the data and the information. So
It's already there.
yeah.
We're just looking at it more, I guess,
Yeah, right.
than we would before.
Yeah, so Jamie Dimon in the financial crisis, they asked him like, what new processes did they have to put in place in the middle of the financial crisis? And I saw him at a conference, and he basically said, when there's a crisis, you can't invent anything new. So we had an audit committee which met quarterly, and then when the crisis started, moved it to monthly, and then when things really intensified, it went to weekly. And then there was a time when some of the financial institutions were collapsing. We were meeting 3 times a day, but it was the same process, the same people, the same data. It's just it was intensified. And I think that getting that in place, and building that habit and knowing how to do it is kind of like practicing for any sport, or it's like getting ready to go to work. Now we're not all good at that anymore because with COVID and everyone working from home. But I have to go to work. Well, I have to get up, I have to shower, I have to brush my teeth, I have to get dressed. Right? You do it all the time. When you have to do it faster, you might fumble around a little bit, but you kind of know what to do. So I think that building those habits when you're doing well really help to put you in place for when there are issues, when there is a lot of change going on, to be able to address it.
Yeah. I don't think the last thing I'll say on this is I don't think businesses value it enough either. They don't put enough investment into it, and I think that's part of the problem. These things really, as you just said, Matt, they, during a crisis can become very important. And so I think that as a whole, business should think about, cadence, back office, just growth, sales, all those things. Generally, growth is invested in, but the way to manage growth isn't necessarily. But they're all very important, and they should be invested in the beginning, not
Right.
when the company's already exploding, and then you have to.